India is a land of ancient wonder and timeless legends. The ancient Vedic texts describe numerous wars between the gods that included the use of aircraft and atomic weapons several thousands of years before their modern-day equivalents were invented. It comes as no surprise that mainstream archaeology dismisses these accounts as mythological allegories. But the increasing number of discoveries in this region is turning academia's historical timeline on its head. Perhaps even more intriguing is the theory that these warring gods of ancient India and the Anunnaki deities of ancient Mesopotamia are actually one and the same.
When Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the modern age of nuclear weapons, was asked how he felt about the detonation of the first nuclear bomb, he corrected the questioner. "Not the first atomic bomb," he responded. "The first atomic bomb in modern times." Could evidence here at Dwaraka suggest an advanced civilization that had their hands on nuclear weapons?
When you look at the wars that are in the Mahabharata, and they talk about using these weapons with this, the capability of destroying even worlds in some cases. Some of these weapons, once they were released, it said that the enemy would be defeated. There's no question, no doubt the enemy was going to be defeated. And I really think that when you analyze Dwarka, you'll find that there will be vitrified stone, vitrified rock. Even above ground where their city remains, you can find some glass in the sand. Now, the only way to turn sand into glass is through high heat temperatures, 3,000 plus degrees.
The ancient Vedic literature tells us that during the wars that took place between Krishna at Dwarka and a rival king by the name of Salwa, there were weapons that were used that devastated not just the cities, but entire armies. And that as much as 36 years after a war that supposedly only lasted about 18 days, that there was still what we would describe as some kind of nuclear winter taking place. Not just humans were being killed en masse, but animals were just falling over dead. People seemed to be covered in something that they were trying to wash off them by leaping into streams. There talked about mutations, blinding lights that were so strong that it was like 1,000 suns. And what it strongly tells us is that the ancient Vedic cultures would appear to have had these nuclear devices that were set off, and other forms of missiles that could cause incredible destruction.
We know that historically the writer is being very accurate. This is important because the rest of the story sounds like a fantasy tale. We're told that Krishna, for example, traveled in the skies in his celestial chariot, his vimana craft, and that in fact he battled with a nearby king called Salva that also possessed one of these vimana craft, and they engaged in a war. In fact, they're shooting projectiles at one another, projectiles and missiles that appear to light up the sky during the day, and ultimately King Salva is raining these projectiles on Dwarka, and Krishna retaliates by sending some ground-to-air missile that ultimately destroys Salva's vimana. So with that in mind, and given the factual basis for elements in the Mahabharata, we wonder, could it be possible that Dwarka was destroyed by one of these weapons? We're told that Dwarka was destroyed by water, that it's a sunken city, it's a lost city. But what caused that sinking? Perhaps there's room or latitude within the story to offer up the possibility that it was destroyed by one of these advanced weapons, perhaps even a nuclear weapon, as described in the Mahabharata.
According to these ancient texts, Dwarka was attacked by a king called Salva, and he was said to have flying machines with these kind of laser energy weapons, which were probably vimanas, which are quite well known in ancient India. And it caused a huge amount of devastation, almost destroyed the city. But Krishna had his own weaponry, and he would send up thunder and lightning from his vessels to actually retaliate and try and bring down King Salva. So we have descriptions here of almost like nuclear-style weaponry and laser technology and flying machines, all clearly demonstrated in the ancient texts of India.
One of the other things that you find in the story of the Mahabharata is the talking about vimana, the aerial ships of the gods. And it's interesting because you find the concept of these aerial ships of the gods throughout cultures. You know, many times they're pulled by a horse, and this is how the gods move from the earth to their heavenly realm. So in the Mahabharata, there was a lot of advanced technology that was used. And what was interesting is that many of them were activated by some kind of a mantra or some kind of intention that got the weapon to work. And so to annihilate the use of these weapons, it's said that Krishna asked that the children of the weapon bearers not be taught the mantras so that the weapons would be unusable for future generations. You know, some stories suggest that these weapons were thrown into the ocean, so again, they would be unusable by future generations, and that might also be why we have never found these weapons.
In the story of the war between Krishna and this King Salva, it would seem that at one point, when Salva looked as if he might be losing this battle, this hideous battle, that his architect designed for him what is described as an aircraft or an airship that was made of precious metals and could fly through the air and be visible at one moment and then invisible at the next. It could move, it could be in one place and then seen in another place in the sky. It could be on the ground and then the next moment it was seen on the top of a mountain. And from this aircraft, which is described as a so-called vimana, Salva was able to fire some kind of missile that destroyed part of the ancient city of Dwarka.
Researchers point out that this isn't the first evidence of the use of a nuclear blast, and that this evidence almost suggests a much larger battle that spanned to different territories.
Another city that researchers now believe was destroyed by an advanced weapon, perhaps even a nuclear weapon, is Mohenjo-Daro in present-day Pakistan. David Davenport is a British researcher that spent 12 years studying the Mahabharata and came to the conclusion that Mohenjo-Daro was destroyed by a nuclear weapon. He cites an example in the text that describes a plume that's brighter than 1,000 suns that turned Mohenjo-Daro into ash literally in an instant. That sounds like something that happened at Hiroshima or Nagasaki, and once again aligns with other concepts in the Mahabharata that tells us that the gods were using some kind of advanced weaponry in their wars amongst themselves.
Ironically, you can see the same thing at Mohenjo-Daro, where you have, that was not a sunken city, but the people are above ground. The same thing, the buildings are turned to glass, and the people are laying in the street still holding hands in some cases. No evidence of any animals coming to scavenge. And they're also higher than background radiation when you scan them with a Geiger counter. And so I think in the same region, we had this war according to the Mahabharata, and what we're looking at with Mohenjo-Daro and Dwarka is evidence of this war.
It's important for us to try and find evidence of this, whether it be within the Indus Valley civilization at places like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, where that we do find evidence of mass human graves of people that would seem to have just killed over and died. evidence of glass through some kind of extreme heat? Is this giving us the evidence that we need of the use and the existence of these weapons of mass destruction in past ages?
If this is true, that a huge war with advanced weaponry broke out between gods, what other evidence do we have of such battles in ancient texts?
We talk about the golden age of the gods, but you know what? The gods were also very dysfunctional. And they said so. I mean, just because they were a bit more developed than ordinary hunter-gatherers doesn't mean that they didn't succumb to the same foibles that we do as human beings. They fell under the same problems. There were jealousies, there were rivalries, there were positions of power. The gods were very different to us. They were physically like us, but they were not quite like us. So they were much taller, for example. They were much greater in stature. And that also frightened a lot of people. And there were many cases and many stories in the Indian text where the gods were also driven en masse by a mass uprising of civil disobedience. So just because they were gods doesn't mean that they also didn't come under the same influence of human problems that we have today.
In ancient times, we find that Krishna owned this city of Dwarka, along with many others. However, there's this battle that's written about not only in the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, but even in the Sumerian tablets. This is where the gods fell from heaven to earth to go against the father, the main father, which would have been Anu and the other gods, Krishna, Enki, and everyone. These are the gods from the ancient texts, from the Mahabharata, from the Sumerian tablets, going to war against each other.
Many common mythological elements are shared across India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Europe. These similarities are commonly dismissed by mainstream academia despite the ever-mounting evidence of our common ancestry. Western academics all too often disregard the obvious cultural connections between the Sumerian, Egyptian, Indus Valley, and Asian civilizations. Instead of compartmentalizing each culture into a mutually exclusive analysis, the archive prefers to connect the dots between them. In this particular case, we are focused on the ancient Hindu civilization's connection to the Sumerian pantheon of gods known as the Anunnaki. The historical record is replete with accounts of extraterrestrial involvement in human development and evolution. They were reported by many ancient civilizations, including the Sumerians, Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, Europeans, and Mesoamericans, but the scriptures of the ancient Hindu civilization, during the time it was known as the Rama Empire, hold massive amounts of information about these beings who came to Earth from the heavens. It is important to note that Sumer on the eastern side had Persians who worshipped nearly the same Vedic deities or Asuras. On the western side, they had the Mitannis who clearly worshipped the Vedic deities. When we compare texts from the Vedic scriptures with the Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets, we can see a very strong similarity between the Sumerian gods and the Hindu gods. Personalities, behaviors, doctrines, passions, wars, technologies, architectures, and many events suggest that the ancient Hindus weren't talking about mythic creatures or fantasy deities, but real beings, superhumanoids coming from the stars and their interaction with mankind. Perhaps the most fundamental link between the Anunnaki and the Indus Valley is the goddess Inanna, also known as Ishtar. Inanna was the great-granddaughter of Anu, who was father of the gods and ruler of the heavens. It is known from Sumerian texts that Inanna, who was born on earth, went up to heaven at least once, and it is also known that Anu had visited earth on several occasions. When and where exactly Anu embraced Inanna and his Anunentum, meaning beloved of Anu, is not clear. But it was more than mere Sumerian gossip when texts hinted that the love between Anu and his great-granddaughter was more than platonic. Assured thus of sympathy at the highest level, Inanna raised the issue of dominion, a land to rule over. In their search for a land for Inanna, the Anunnaki decided to make the third region her dominion. Although it is generally held that the evidence for the Mesopotamian origins of the Indus civilization and for ongoing contacts between Sumer and the Indus Valley is limited to a few archaeological remains, there also exists textual evidence attesting to these links. Of particular interest is a long text named Enmerkar and the Lord of Arata, which describes the rise to power of Uruk, which was the biblical city of Erech and of Inanna. Arata's geographical location, described as the capital of a land situated beyond mountain ranges, and the fact that it is a place renowned for its grain and bean storehouses, bear strong similarities to the Indus civilization. Indeed, one must wonder whether Harappa or Arappa is not a present-day echo of the ancient Arata. The text explains that twin cities were erected by Inanna and used for food storage, among other things. Those must have been the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. They were both built from the same bricks and in the same style and are the same age. According to the Sumerian tablets, they were built 860 years after the start of the Earth year count. This could mean either 2940 BCE or 6540 BCE, depending on where we take the beginning of Earth time, either 7400 BCE or 3800 BCE, which would have been either 1 or 2 Shar after the last visit of Anu. The Sumerian tablets go on to explain that Inanna was enticed by the prospect of residing in a grand temple at Sumer's city of Anu and became a commuting goddess, a working deity, so to speak, in faraway Arata, but remaining a resident in metropolitan Erech. She did the commuting by flying from place to place in her boat of heaven. Her flying about gave rise to many depictions of her as an aeronaut, and the inference from some texts is that she did her own piloting. On the other hand, like other major deities, she was assigned a pilot-navigator for the more demanding flights. As the Vedas, which spoke of pilots of the gods, so did the early and Sumerian texts refer to the Abgals, who ferried the gods across the heavens. Inanna's pilot-navigator, we are told, was Nungal, and he was specifically named in regard to her transfer to the house of Anu in Erech. Inanna requested from Enki certain technical data to progress her region's development. However, she was unable to do so for various reasons. Ultimately, the result was that the third region of the Indus Valley did not develop as well as the other regions. This period also marked the onset of growing instability among the Anunnaki that would eventually lead to the end. So, not only do we have Inanna intimately associated with the formation of the Indus Valley, we also have accounts of her flying from place to place in what is known in the region as vimanas. Perhaps the most crucial question regarding Inanna is who was her Hindu counterpart. One compelling possibility is the Hindu goddess Kali. Barbara Walker, in her comprehensive Woman's Encyclopedia of Myths and Secrets, contends, Western scholars erroneously viewed the various manifestations and incarnations of Kali as many different goddesses, particularly isolating those primitive Matrika Devas, mother goddesses grouped together as Dravidian she-ogres. Yet Kali's worshippers plainly stated that she had hundreds of divergent names, but they were all the same goddess. All were Kali Mahadevi, the great goddess, the same title she bore among Western pagans. Mother Earth is said to be interchangeable with Venus, as of course Venus is Inanna. The cuneiform tablets of Sumer display 8-pointed impressions to signify Inanna. Kali's magical diagram or yantra contains the 8-petaled lotus. Further, Inanna's powers as a goddess with her command of both the life-giving and life-taking aspects of the universe, in addition to the physical proximity of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers to the Indus Valley, tell us that Inanna and Kali are related not by coincidence. In the Christian religion, we find the concept of the Holy Trinity. However, like many other concepts in the younger religions, the concept of a holy triad is much older than the Bible. The Trimurti, the sacred Hindu triad formed by Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, is identical to the Sumerian Anunnaki triad, Anu, Enki, and Enlil. Brahma, the grandfather, is the god who rules from the sky. Vishnu is the creator, the preserver, the life engineer, and Shiva is the destroyer. As the fish avatar and lord of wisdom, Vishnu can be considered synonymous with Enki. The legend of the Matsya avatar, who alerted humankind of an impending planetary deluge and chose one righteous man, Vivaswata Manu, the Hindu Noah, to construct a boat or ark and place within its representatives of the various species on Earth to protect them from drowning, is identical to the legend of Enki, who saved humanity from the Great Flood by instructing Zayasudra, the Sumerian Noah, to build an ark and save himself and the world's animals and plants from destruction. Shiva seems to correlate best to Enlil. In Sanskrit literature, he's depicted as the one who is eternally pure, or the one who can never have any contamination of the imperfection of the Rajas and Tamas. Enlil despised the crossbreeding between the Anunnaki and the humans. Shiva is the most feared god of Hindu cosmogony. He's the one that destroyed the 3 cities of the Ashura demons that seemingly correspond to Sodom, Gomorrah, and possibly the Babel Tower. He's also the god that provided powerful weapons to other gods and warriors. Now, the archive fully understands that a good argument can be made that these correlations can be reversed. In other words, Enki could be Shiva and Enlil could be Vishnu. This is especially the case when analyzing Shiva's trident correlation to Enki. Even so, we can all probably agree that the Sumerian Enki and Enlil have compelling connections to the Hindu Trimurti. As discussed earlier, among the ancient texts from India, the Mahabharata describes potential atomic conflicts in great detail. Wounded by the flight of deadly, accurate iron missiles, the Ashura Vimana fell broken to the earth. Matali swiftly descended earthward as in a steep dive on our divinely effulgent car, destroying that blazing illusion of Ghatokacha and piercing right through his breast that resplendent dart soared aloft in the night. And having vanquished his foe, Krishna, furnished with weapons and unwounded and accompanied by the kings, came out of the Girivraja, riding on that celestial car. Upon that car Krishna now came out of the hill fort. Possessed of the splendor of heated gold and decked with rows of jingling bells, always slaughtering the foe against whom it was driven, it was the very car riding upon which Indra had slain 99 Asuras of old. We beheld in the sky what appeared to us to be a mass of scarlet cloud resembling the fierce flames of a blazing fire. From that mass many blazing missiles flashed, and tremendous roars, like the noise of 1,000 drums beaten at once. And from it fell many weapons winged with gold and thousands of thunderbolts with loud explosions and many hundreds of fiery wheels. Loud became the uproar of falling horses slain by these missiles and of mighty elephants struck by the explosions. Those terrible Rakshasas had the shape of large mounds stationed in the sky. The Bhagavata Purana is all about the activities of the Hindu god Vishnu in his various incarnations, or avatars, and particularly as Krishna. It includes an account of a war between the evil King Salva and his attempt to destroy the city of Krishna called Dwarka. In the process, it describes weapons which have all the earmarks of modern rocketry and aerial vehicles which have capabilities far beyond conventional aircraft. It is common for most modern Hindu translators to render the Sanskrit vimana as airplane. But since the aerial vehicles described in this document move through the air using neither wings nor conventional engines, the Sanskrit term is left intact so the viewer will know that these are not ordinary aircraft. Likewise, the Sanskrit term usually translated as arrow is easily seen on occasion as some sort of high-tech missile. Therefore, the use of the term shaft or missile is more applicable. Lord Krishna's home base is the legendary city known as Dwarka. His mortal enemy, King Salva, requested an extremely high-tech aerial vehicle by which he might destroy the city of Dwarka and kill his hated enemy, Lord Krishna. The accomplished architect and engineer Mayadevana fulfilled Salva's request. The details can be found in the following Sanskrit text. Salva chose a vimana that could not be destroyed by devas, asuras, humans, gandharvas, uragas, or rakshakas, that could travel anywhere he wished to go and that would terrify the Varishnis. Lord Shiva said, "So be it." On his order, Mayadevana, who conquers his enemies' cities, constructed a flying vehicle made of iron named Sabha and presented it to Salva. Delighted with his new wonderful and powerful airship, the wicked King Salva gathers his army about him and heads for the city of Krishna to do battle. This unassailable vehicle was filled with darkness and could go anywhere. Upon obtaining it, Salva, remembering the Vrishni's enmity toward him, proceeded to the city of Dwarka. Salva besieged the city with a large army, O best of the Bharatas, disseminating the outlying parks and gardens, the mansions along with their observatories, towering gateways, and surrounding walls, and also the public recreational areas. However, fortunes turn, and in short order King Salva's forces are decimated. Infuriated, King Salva makes use of the newly acquired aerial contrivance to attack the city with every means at his disposal. From his excellent vimana he threw down a torrent of projectiles. A fierce vortex arose and blanketed the entire area with billowing dust. At this point, Lord Krishna suddenly appears in his shining chariot to confront King Salva in the battle. When Salva saw Krishna's chariot on the battlefield, he thereupon released a great and powerful weapon, which flew through the sky with a roaring sound like a great meteor. The text describes it as being so bright that it literally lit up the entire sky. This sounds a lot like a blazing rocket. As Krishna began his counterattack, Salva engages the special powers of his vimana in an all-out effort to avoid destruction. A modern translator provides us with the graphic details. The airplane occupied by Salva was very mysterious. It was so extraordinary that sometimes many airplanes would appear to be in the sky, and sometimes they were apparently none. Sometimes the plane was visible and sometimes not visible. And the warriors of the Yadu dynasty were puzzled about the whereabouts of the peculiar airplane. Sometimes they would see the airplane on the ground, sometimes flying in the sky, sometimes resting on the peak of a hill, and sometimes floating on the water. The wonderful airplane flew in the sky like a whirling firebrand. It was not steady even for a moment. The last sentence, containing the statement of Salva's celestial vehicle looking like a whirling firebrand, should cause one to look twice at the so-called wheels of Ezekiel as described in the Hebrew Bible. The similarities are striking. Did Ezekiel encounter 4 ancient vimanas on several occasions during his captivity in Babylonia? Lord Krishna first destroyed King Salva's great weapon by discharging his own missile described as being bright as the sun in the sky. And as mentioned earlier, these sound more like high-tech missiles and anti-missiles rather than what we think of as ordinary arrows. He then disabled Salva's vimana completely by releasing an overwhelming shower of destructive missiles, and eventually Salva's wondrous vimana burst into pieces and fell into the sea. Salva miraculously escapes the doomed vimana at the last minute and on foot rushes vehemently at his hated enemy, shining like the sun rising over the mountains, ushers forth the final blow by utilizing a brilliant discus. Thus, after a tremendously high-tech battle, the evil King Salva and his flying machine are finally brought to an ignominious end. Historian Kesari Mohan Gangali says that Indian sacred writings are full of such descriptions, which sound like an atomic blast as experienced in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He says references mention fighting sky chariots and final weapons. An ancient battle is described in the Drona Parva, a section of the Mahabharata. The passage tells us of combat where explosions of final weapons decimate entire armies, causing crowds of warriors with steeds and elephants and weapons to be carried away as if they were dry leaves of trees. Consider these verses from the ancient Mahabharata. A single projectile charged with all the power of the universe. An incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as the thousand suns rose in all its splendor. A perpendicular explosion with its billowing smoke clouds. The cloud of smoke rising after its first explosion formed into expanding round circles like the opening of a giant parasol. It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death which reduced to ashes the entire race. The corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. The hair and nails fell out. Pottery broke without apparent cause. And the birds turned white. After a few hours, all foodstuffs were infected. To escape from this fire, the soldiers threw themselves in streams to wash themselves and their equipment. Until the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, modern mankind could not imagine any weapon as horrible and as devastating as those described in the ancient Indian text. Yet, they very accurately describe the effects of an atomic explosion. Radioactive poisoning will make hair and nails fall out. Immersing oneself in water gives some respite, though it is not a cure. Both cities were deserted suddenly, coincidentally around the time of the construction of the Great Pyramids in Egypt, despite having been thriving centers of technology and culture for centuries. Mohenjo-Daro appears to have been flattened or collapsed after 600 years of being inhabited. Could this have been the location of what may have been an atomic war? Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa are anomalous not just because of their desertion by people who lived there, but also because of their incredibly advanced technology and decentralized secular society. Archaeologists have determined that the layout of these two massive cities shows evidence of an egalitarian civilization with no distinct hierarchy or elite ruling class and was likely governed by elected officials. The ruins of Mohenjo-Daro show careful urban planning, advanced irrigation and drainage systems, and a 900-square-foot watertight communal bath that was filled by the Indus River. This civilization spanned over 500 acres and supported a population of somewhere between 20 and 40,000 citizens. When excavations of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro reached the street level, they discovered skeletons scattered about the cities, many holding hands and sprawling in the street as if some instant horrible doom had taken place. People were just lying unburied in the streets of the city. Excavations down to the street level revealed 44 scattered skeletons as if doom had come so suddenly they could not get to their houses. All the skeletons were flattened to the ground. A father, mother, and child were found flattened in the street, face down and still holding hands. And these skeletons are thousands of years old, even by traditional archaeological standards. What could cause such a thing? Why did the bodies not decay or get eaten by wild animals? Furthermore, there is no apparent cause of a physically violent death. However, these skeletons are amongst the most radioactive ever found, on par with those at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. At one site, Soviet scholars found a skeleton which had a radioactive level 50 times greater than normal. Other cities have been found in northern India that show indications of explosions of great magnitude. One such city, found between the Ganges and the mountains of Raj Mahal, seems to have been subjected to intense heat. Huge masses of walls and foundations of the ancient city are fused together, literally vitrified. And since there is no indication of volcanic eruption at Mohenjo-Daro or at the other cities, the intense heat to melt clay vessels can only be explained by an atomic blast or some other unknown weapon. The cities were wiped out entirely. What was found at the site of Mohenjo-Daro corresponds exactly to Nagasaki. There was an epicenter about 50 yards wide where everything was crystallized, fused, or melted. Vitrification is the process by which sand, or more accurately, silica, is superheated and then cooled, which results in a glass transition. It's the way all glass is made, in basic terms, though there's a difference between deliberately fired glass for manufacturing, technically known as frit, and vitrified sand. The later type of glass consists of 3 categories. Fulgurite, which is glass created via lightning strikes. Techite, which is formed from the heat generated by meteor strikes. And trinitite, which is the glass that results from nuclear detonations. The only real difference between those 3 categories of vitrified sand is the different heat sources that make them. Other than a tendency for trinitite to be radioactive, samples of each are pretty much the same compositionally. Silicon dioxide, which is the most common element in sand around the world, melts at roughly 1700 degrees Celsius, so any of those methods can get the job done. But if there were a competition, the clear winner would be a nuclear detonation. The heat generated through a nuclear blast can be greater than 10 million kelvins, or 9,999,726.85 degrees Celsius. By comparison, the surface of the Sun is only 5,778 kelvins. So, the Mohenjo-Daro vitrified ruins were made by one of 3 potential events, it seems. A series of major lightning strikes, a meteor strike, or perhaps more than one, or a nuclear detonation. Finally, another curious sign of an ancient nuclear war in India is a giant crater near Bombay. The nearly circular 2,154-meter diameter Lonar crater, located 400 kilometers northeast of Mumbai and aged at less than 50,000 years old, could be related to nuclear warfare of antiquity. No trace of any meteoric material has been found at the site or in the vicinity, and this is the world's only known impact crater in basalt. Indications of great shock, measuring a pressure exceeding 600,000 atmospheres, and intense abrupt heat can be ascertained from the site.